Shut that and record now. Oh, good to go. Hello, welcome, Tom. Welcome to this episode of the podcast, mate. Where, today we'll be talking with you about online learning and particularly your experiences from where you are working in Dubai at the moment. It's great to have you on. I know both me and Sam are really excited, and I think for the listeners, it's going to be a really good insight into the experiences you've had whilst you're over there.
Thank you.
And sort of just how you've dealt with them, really. Just get straight into it, just straight into sort of discussing what we're going to be talking about. First of all, working in Dubai, I know you're a bit ahead of England in terms of transitioning over from classroom-based teaching to online teaching. When it happened, sort of, how did you find it? First of all, and what have you sort of learned from it?
It was a bit of a frantic struggle to start off with, trying to figure out what we were going to do. Now, I'm quite lucky in the school that I'm in at the moment because all of the children have their own Chromebooks, their own Google Chromebooks. So they're all set up with their own Google accounts. So they had some understanding. I teach year 3. They had some understanding of what Google Classroom was, but hadn't fully utilized all the different elements of it quite yet. So I think we had about 24 hours or maybe 48 to try and get the children familiar with how to access assignments, what to do with an assignment once they've completed the assignment, how to submit the assignment on loads of different bits and pieces. So it was quite a tight turnaround.
Yeah.
But I think that preparation really did pay dividends in the end because they were able to do things on Google Classroom and all.
I think it's quite interesting because obviously me and Matty were at university, so we were impacted by the technology change because obviously all our lectures and seminars went to online learning essentially, but obviously we're a lot older, so like there's a bit more responsibility on us to actually like be able to make that transition, and fair enough, like we were expected. How did you find it with your children initially? Did they engage with it straight away, or was it challenging like behavior wise as well?
I was surprised by how positive the transition was, to be completely honest with you. I was expecting it to be a bit of a nightmare with some children not accessing the work. Believe it or not, I had attendance-wise throughout the whole 15 weeks. It was a long time of online learning. I think it was 99.5% of children accessing every single day of online learning.
Unbelievable turnaround when you think about it. I mean, I don't know.
Crazy.
I've heard a lot of good things about Dubai in terms of teaching over there and kind of their attitude towards school. And I think that's kind of an example of people obviously having the access to the software and the technology, but actually being engaged in themselves. I think it's obviously a lot of responsibility for year 3s and as well as the parents to get them to log on every day and have that trust. And it seems to have been there for you straight from the start.
It was good. That there were some difficulties. One of the main difficulties was balance, trying to understand what was the right amount of work and what was going to be too much or too little. So straight away, SLT made a good decision to strip back some of the curriculum. We usually have 6 periods throughout the day, so we stripped it back to 4. That was really good because it helped with the children's well-being. But the challenge was when you created lessons, not creating too much work or too little work. If you create too little work, the parents are going, is this it? Where's the rest of the work? If you create too much work, the parents are going to say, well, they're absolutely snowed under with work. So that was one of the biggest challenges to start off with, was finding that middle ground. The other challenge was I'm quite an excitable teacher. I see lots of technology and I'm like, oh, we could do this, we could do that. But at the same time, it's trying to just make sure that children gain a better idea of routine of what they're using, rather than, right, we're going to jump onto Seesaw, then we're going to jump onto Google Classroom, and otherwise that could have got confusing for them. So
did you find with some of the children, because you touched on it just a bit ago, like your initial worry was about certain children within your classroom and how they would engage with it. Did you find with certain children that actually they engaged with the technology more so online than if they were in the classroom, for example? Did the actual use of technology like excite them?
I found some of the children absolutely smashed online learning. like it was for them, because whether it was because the parents were, they had that one-to-one support with every single lesson. They'd see our lessons and then they'd have the parents with them giving that extra bit of feedback. Some of the children absolutely flew, and I can say made progress, whereas I know in the UK some people have questioned the progress they've made with online learning. Other children at times perhaps struggled a little bit to access some of the learning, and then later on we didn't have online live meetings to start off with. Later on, that's when we started to transition into having some more live lesson type things where we'd be there to give children feedback, which was beneficial.
And do you think, I suppose it's quite similar really to actual classroom based learning anyway, because for any teacher there's always going to be children that are going to excel at a certain type of lesson, whether it's delivery and visually they find it easy to learn, or whether it's academically and writing wise they find it easy to learn. So maybe it's just could potentially just be another sort of area where some children will excel because that just suits their learning environment, and then
absolutely,
like others, children just maybe not, they don't warm to it as quickly.
That's it. Yeah, some children, I remember I had one child, I had to I had their password, so I had to sort of log in as them quite a few times just to make sure that they were able to submit work and access work. So I did that to start off with for the first month for a specific child, and then there was another child I'd set work, and then they'd just go leaps and bounds ahead with all of the technological stuff, and they'd blow me away a bit.
I know, it's just like I say, it's fascinating to see that the difference and the level of difference, particularly with technology for children at such a young age, because obviously if you think back when I was younger, like going through school at that age, barely just got the internet. I think we had dial-up at that point. And now these
paperclip.
Yeah, exactly. And now these guys are obviously floppy disks being put in everywhere. Now, now they've obviously got access to all this technology. It's fascinating. In terms of, I was just going to say, in terms of you're talking about finding the balance, what sort of strategies do you think you picked up along the way in terms of dealing with that balance, as well as becoming more engaging and being more creative with sort of the lessons that you were delivering?
Personally or with the children?
I'd say personally, and then obviously how the children kind of reacted. So for you, kind of planning lessons.
So balance wise, so I think I said SLT nailed it straight away. We had a shortened timetable. So we had, I think it was, from 8 o'clock until 12 p.m. And then we had more time then. So that was the children's intense learning time on the computers. Then any time after that was time for staff meetings to create lessons, to have a break from the screen was important. That gave me a lot of time to think. And I know that sounds daft, but you don't always get that time when you're in the school and things are so busy. You've got Mark and you've got everything that's going on. You don't often get the chance to just sit down and think about lessons. And it was nice because you'd go, I could do this, and you'd be able to pull different clips from YouTube and integrate them into videos to make it more engaging for the children. So creativity wise, that was fantastic. But having that time then available just to think and be creative, that was also great for well-being, but also good for learning too.
But just on that then, sorry, Tom, go on. I was just going to say, so on that then, obviously you went the transition from obviously being in the classroom to using technology. Did you find then that having that reflection, did it help with like you using that technology? Like before the pandemic, for example, would you have said that you were comfortable using it, or is it something that day to day you were getting better and better at using?
I'd say personally, I've always been okay with technology and using different bits of technology. However, absolutely, when I had that time to sort of explore different bits of technology, it was absolutely fantastic to sort of see how I could utilize technology differently to support online learning. One of the things was often with me, one of the problems was I would see things and get really excited by things. I know I touched on this before. So some different websites, I'd see them and go, this is going to be absolutely fantastic. I think I had to sort of reel it in at points because I didn't want to overwhelm the children by throwing too many websites and ideas out there. You know, things like Bitmoji. I know I made a video on this before, but it was like the Bitmoji classrooms. That was just something that came out of an idea that I saw online, and that helped some of the children to not become so overloaded with all of the different text. It was just something nice and visual, which was something I definitely wouldn't have created if I were in school.
Yeah. And I think I was gonna say, I think it's nice that you've touched on, you know, utilizing the internet more and the tools at your disposal more, mainly because you're obviously forced to do it. But the fact that you've kind of had that opportunity to go and explore other ways of learning, other ways of teaching, you've obviously sound like you've benefited from it as well, even as a, you know, a comfortable technological teacher beforehand, whereas now you've even developed yourself and you've admitted that. So it's obviously great to see for yourself. And I think that's kind of why we wanted to sort of talk about this subject with you, because you're obviously a confident teacher in that area anyway. You're still feeling that you're benefiting from it. So, you know, maybe for teachers or trainees like myself and Sam, us kind of going into that new role, I think could be quite daunting. But as you've said, it can be exciting as well.
It's definitely. It's definitely exciting. I think I will be forced to tears if I go back to school and elements of online learning, things that I've learned, aren't integrated into the normal timetable. I think I'll be resorting to tears, because we've been forced to innovate in so many ways. It would be an absolute outcry if we went back to, right, everything has to be back in books, you know. So trying to use things like Google Classroom more would be fantastic.
I think Matty touched on it as well, because obviously we're going into our PGC training year. But I know like some universities, like some of the first and second year students, their teaching this year will be done online with like their bubbles of children. And I think it'll be quite insightful, like for you, because you've used it and very successfully. Like, what tips would you give people who are not used to like using this technology, and what's the best way to implement it towards children so they get decent learning outcomes from the lessons that we put on?
I would say to strip things back to start off with, to simply think about what you want the children to learn rather than the activity. Because if you think about the activity more than anything, then the children will the learning won't come out, basically. So think about what it is that the children are going to need to learn first and foremost, and then from there start to plan your lessons around that. I'd say don't reinvent the wheel. It's very easy, especially when you're if let's say you're making a video, it's very easy to think that you have to create everything yourself.
Yeah.
There are videos online that are leaps and bounds better than anything that you and I, some of the listeners out there they might be fantastic with technology, you never know. But
definitely not me and Sam, that's for sure.
Speak for yourself.
Definitely not our strong point.
That's it. Like there's loads out there. There's so much out there. You know, you've got Oak Academy that popped out of nowhere, and they had some fantastic resources. White Rose Hub had some fantastic resources. I utilized some of their videos throughout the online learning period. So just see what other lessons are available and then tweak them towards your classes, especially if you're not feeling confident with that to start off with. Hong Kong, China, Dubai have all created a range of different lessons now, especially if you're on Seesaw. You can utilize other people's lessons. I found on Seesaw you can sort of use resources from other people, so you'll find a bank of resources available now. So look at those before reinventing the wheel, essentially.
My mind's actually blown already. So I mean, you know, the listeners themselves, they've got to be, I hope they're exactly the same as I am. You just explained all these, you know, areas and avenues that you can take even to get started. I think it's filling me with a lot of confidence just looking forward to next year.
I think it's fascinating. I think but like you touched on it just a second ago, Tom, like, I bet, you sound like you will be like devastated if it's not integrated into.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm not using Paddler or if I'm not using that next year, I'll be devastated.
And I think it would signal a step backwards, because, you know, we've been forced into this situation for whatever reason has happened. And whilst at the start, obviously, it's a bit daunting, but you know, we've come out the other side, you know, education wise, and with all these sort of new ideas and new platforms that we can use, and like I say, so many innovative technologies that are there now to use, that if we didn't take it seriously and start integrating moving forward, I think, yeah, it would just signal sort of a step backwards in the wrong direction, really.
It would.
Go on.
Go on, Mike, go on.
No,
I was
no,
just
no.
saying, it wouldn't make sense, because like in the society that we live in, like it's just dominated by technology essentially. Like we're meant to be like preparing children for like the future, and like applying skills that they learn in school, so when they do leave school they can go get a job, which is dominated by technology. It makes no sense going back to like a blackboard or like a whiteboard. Like integrate these technologies within the curriculum, and loads of research has like just it sounds so obvious, but it's not being integrated. It's taken a pandemic for technology to be highlighted within schools when it should already be like a highlight within school.
What's scary as well is that the jobs, you know, going back 10 years, some of the jobs that are popping up now were things that we hadn't heard of. Terms like influencer or social media marketer. In another 10 years' time, as technology evolves, there's going to be even more job titles that we've never heard of, and we can't anticipate that as teachers. So we just have to give children the ICT and technical skills that we can at the moment to be able to facilitate them in the best way to be able to get those jobs, so that they're not taken by robots.
Well, yeah, 100%. And I think there's a lot of research that I've done before. I've recently done an assignment on Finland, for example, and their curriculum, and it's very much a cross-curricular learning outcome, that type of thing. And one of their main sort of sections in their curriculum is technology and the influence of technology, and that is, through the research that I did, that is kind of integrated across all the lessons, alongside things such as sustainability. That's another one which is right high up on their list. Languages, sort of multiculturalism, these sort of, and technology, I think is should be right up there in terms of just curriculum design and policy going forward, because it just plays such an influential part in not just education but actual just daily life. Like here we are now on Zoom doing this interview.
We've got a lesson. It's entrepreneurship, I think, is one of the lessons that we have at our school.
Oh, wow.
That's fascinating to me, and it's like very project based. I think that's definitely a future skill.
I was gonna, just on that note as well, like for you personally, Tom, like you can have the limelight here. So if you were in charge of a school, for example, like how would you like integrate technology more into like your lessons essentially? How does it fit into the Dubai curriculum?
So I think in the Dubai curriculum, I'm absolutely blessed in the way that children have more access to technology. I think if I reflect back on my education and teaching experience back in the UK, where the computers would take half an hour to load up, it's challenging to start to integrate technology when it's not the most reliable. So I think making sure that the technology is there to start off with, but then just sort of thinking about sort of using blended learning strategies, started to think about, right, I can set an assignment for a specific group who, you know, could go off and complete a specific activity. I could bring them back and talk through an activity and just start to look at different ways that could be integrated, looking at different bits of technology. It's just utilizing what's available, basically.
And you touched on sort of assignments. I just want to clarify sort of what you mean by when you say you set your children assignments. Obviously, we don't do that over here. So, in terms of when you're just describing that, what does that sort of entail? And is that sort of live meetings, or is that just you set work and then they sort of report back to you? You know, how does it work?
I realised that term would come across as quite alien. It's just become integral for sort of Google Classroom speak. Essentially what that is it's setting an activity for the children to get on with, but you click, it's in the work, student work, it's create assignment, set assignment, and then it's basically just an activity that the children get on with and submit for you, similar to the way that they'd complete an activity in their books. That would be the quote assignment.
I think I've got I've got an interesting question to ask you. It's just like your reflection on the use of technology and how it's actually going to impact on your children. So like with online learning, like some research suggests like links to like constructivism theory, so that it actually will encourage children to be like independent individual learners, because they've been away from the classroom, they've been away from you like physically in the classroom, so they can't go to you and say, oh sir, can you help me with this? I don't know what that's like in Dubai, but in England that's very much something that happens, and you've probably experienced that when you've been a teacher here. Do you feel like the use of technology through this period, do you feel like children have almost had to learn by themselves and they've learned new skills in that way?
I hope so. And this has been one of the problems with online learning, is not necessarily knowing how much parental support has been involved. So if children are as independent as it appears, then I would definitely anticipate that going back, children become more independent with the technological side of things. I suppose come September we'll find out, but hopefully, you know, I presume the children are going to be far technologically superior than what other year threes would be in the UK, for example. You know, I expect my children to be touch typing when they get back the amount of time they've been using the computers. They don't actually have to touch type.
Just to clarify to the parents out there, I'm not expecting that, I promise.
It's not a required skill.
It's quite funny though, because I've just taken on just a lad tutoring, actually doing obviously online, and like, you know, from my experience, I've found it first couple of episodes, like even not episodes, first couple of sort of sessions, I found it tough just kind of find that level of engagement and interaction, and trying to keep him engaged with sort of what I was trying to teach him, and that was only with one child. So, you know, what's it sort of like with I don't know how big your classrooms are, 30 children say, but do you find it difficult? Do you have like live chats where they're all on the screen with you, or is it very much like just like you sort of set assignments and then they come back and
so this is the journey. Yeah, the journey started off that we weren't doing live lessons. I think there was do you remember Zoom bombing? That came into the news. Zoom bombing was a thing a few months back, where random people could just join a Zoom meeting for whatever reason. So for that reason, we sort of stayed away from live lessons, I believe. I think there were other reasons too, but eventually we started to integrate more and more live meetings, and it was more not so much to give live lessons, it was more for the children to drop in. They worked tremendously well. So if the children were confused with the concept or struggling with an activity that had been set, they'd just drop into these sessions, and that would boost motivation. We also had what we called well-being chats. That worked really well. So after that 12 o'clock period, we started to integrate with like 10-minute slots with a specific group of between 4 to 6 children, and they just jump onto a meeting like we're doing now, and we just talk. We would just talk about things, talk about the day, talk about what they've been up to at home, because obviously at that time in Dubai, lots of people were, you know, stuck indoors. What activities were they doing? It would just give them, the children, the opportunity to be children and talk to one another, which is something they've not had the opportunity to do so much. And then from there, we started to do registrations, which was nice. The children would just come on and they just have that little bit of time seeing everyone before they get on with the learning. So it was almost like reinforcing that team element.
You have that. Go on. I was going to say before you jump in, so it really sort of reinforces the importance of that social element to a child's learning, which again, the online, I guess one of the problems at the beginning maybe of online learning is understanding how integral and important that social aspect is of school. And obviously, clearly, you guys have managed to find a way to integrate it alongside online learning, which is great. And the children have obviously been able to interact with each other and you, and just have that time, you know, away from the work side to just socialize and, like you say, be children. And that's, you know, it's so great to hear that the well-being side of it is being really good, sort of focused.
Yeah, I've just touching on what Matty said, like even just such a simple idea as that, just having like a group of 4 or 5 children in, just literally just talking, is just such a good idea, because it just, you're focusing on their whole well-being. And even with that little personal time and chat with those small groups, probably actually like helped you facilitate their learning and them wanting to engage in the lessons and stuff. So actually putting their well-being first is probably a massive factor to why you've been so successful as well. So yeah, I think that's a really I know it sounds like really obvious to do, but I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, it was a bit of a game changer, to be completely honest with you, because it did, as you said, support the children. And as a teacher, you see all these bits of work coming in, and it's hard to put personality behind it, especially if it starts to look the same, maths answers look the same. So it's just nice to see the children, and it gives you that little bit of sanity at the same time, especially when you're just on a laptop all the time.
Yeah. I think that's what you're saying. You know, as a teacher, you kind of thrive on that classroom interaction, and you can, and kind of when you're in there, you can sort of judge the mood of the children, judge the sort of the day, you know, judge whether they're actually enjoying the activity or they're thinking this isn't actually going that well. I probably need to change it up a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, like you're saying, for you, you're just seeing sort of answers coming back, and you're trying to sort of put a bit of personality behind it, and it must have been difficult. So I guess it just sort of shows how important that 10-minute chat it was, or just get the kids sort of talking to each other and you just facilitating the chat. You know, it must have been just exciting for you really to see, and sort of just nice to gauge how the work was going down.
Did you feel like well-being? Go on, Tom. Keep
I was just saying it definitely did support well-being. I know your first episode was about well-being within schools, but at home that well-being was still important too, and that supported that in many ways. No,
that's what I was going to say.
Obviously, you know, sounds like that online learning has been so far a success from your perspective, and from what you've told us, I can see that completely. Obviously, we touched on you teaching in Dubai at the moment. I'm assuming originally you weren't there at the start of your teaching career. Just wanted to ask sort of what initially made you go out to Dubai, really? Was it always something in the back of your mind you fancied doing, or did just an opportunity come along that you saw and you fancied?
You know what? It was it was exactly that. Basically, it was always something whilst throughout university. I think it was within the third year. It was something that was in the back of my mind, and I was teaching in my NQT year in the UK, and there was a girl along my street who had moved out to the UAE, and parents were talking. My parents were saying, oh, you know, this person was in the UAE, and when they finish on a Thursday, they go down to the beach, and they go and do, you know, they go to the malls, and they go to these brunches. And I was like, what is this? What am I doing? You know, young single lad at the time. It was more of a question of why not?
Yeah.
Really.
Oh,
Sam's already getting excited. Look at him. Look at the grin on his face.
I'm giddy, mate. Take me with you, Tom.
We'll cut it.
I won't even work out there. I'll just come for the holiday.
Winner. Pack you in the suitcase.
But yeah, like you're saying, it's, you know, just more of a why not than really rather than when.
So obviously you've been
definitely.
So obviously you've been, well, you've stayed out there. Like, I'm quite intrigued really. What's the fundamental differences then between teaching in Dubai and the UK? Essentially, like, is there a difference in what they prioritise, curriculum, even with the children as well? What are the main differences that you've seen?
There are differences. So one of the differences is smaller class size. That's a benefit because that allows you to spend more time with the children, which then improves progress overall. There are curriculum differences. We have subjects such as MEC at the moment, and social studies as well. So MEC stands for Moral Education Curriculum. Gosh, that's a test. It's my summer holidays at the moment. So MEC incorporates lots of sort of friendship and talking about what's fair and those sorts of things. It's similar to PSHE in many ways.
Yeah.
And then social studies starts to integrate things about Dubai and start to talk about, you know, the Emirates within the UAE. It has a little bit of entrepreneurship in there. It has all sorts of different drips and drabs of beneficial information, and it sort of ties into humanities in some ways too. So there's slight curricular differences there. The hours are slightly earlier, and you know, you'll start at 8 a.m, which then makes, you know, you're getting up earlier, but then you finish a little bit earlier. And I would say one of the biggest differences is the ideology of different periods. So they'll have, you know, first period will be English, second period might be swimming, and they'll go and do swimming for an hour, and then they'll come back after break time, and then they'll have humanities, and then they'll have social studies, and they might go off to Arabic. So that there's that real breakup. It doesn't quite have the same flow as what it would have when it comes to UK education. But they do get that. They get that specialist education, which is beneficial too.
Yeah. Do you feel that sort of broadness and that sort of change up in the curriculum, sort of daily and each lesson almost, do you think that's kind of helps with engagement in terms of like the children kind of, they're not in the same routine, so it's sort of every day is a bit different, and you know, 1 minute they're doing, like say, English, next minute they go into MEC, next minute they go into social studies, you know, do you feel that helps a bit different?
Yeah,
because like I say, each lesson is something new, you know, it's not just maths and English in the morning and then something else in the afternoon.
Yeah, there's pros and cons. So pros, exactly as you've said, you know, it breaks up the monotony of the staying inside the classroom all day. Cons at the same time, sometimes you do want to extend a lesson on 20 minutes. You know, if children haven't quite grasped the concept in mathematics, you do just want an extra 10 minutes to bring a specific group onto the carpet, and you can't do that. You've got to, right, they're off to swimming. So that's sometimes a challenge, to be completely honest with you. And then obviously if children then come back from PE and they've been outside in 30-degree heat, they come back absolutely exhausted. The challenge is there then to try and click them back on track.
Yeah.
So there's pros and cons.
And it's really interesting to hear just, you know, some of the cons that you've mentioned. Obviously over here in England, like you're talking about 30-degree heat, 40-degree heat over there. It's not really a con that we would come across in England, you know. So it just kind of shows that's what, well, for me personally, like I taught in South Africa for a month, and it was fairly similar to what you were saying. You know, some of the subjects, like social studies, for example, they had that over there. They also had other subjects such as like economics they were doing and things like that. And like you say, it seems to be a sort of a similar setup, but like more localized. And it's just good. I think internationally, it's good to kind of compare sort of differences in situations that like we might not get in England, for example, but like you're having to come across them over where you are, and for you making that transition from being a teacher over here to being a teacher over there, I guess that must have taken a little while to sort of get used to and come to terms with.
Yeah, it did. To start off with, going over straight away, I felt a bit like deer in headlights in some ways, similar to what the NQT year felt like. I transitioned from year 6 to year 2, so that's just a personal change, and that was quite a big change. So along with trying to understand a new school, new curriculum, ways of working, I had that transition too. So I think different people, if you're going from same year group to same year group, there are some different transitional differences. But generally it is okay. And because UAE is quite a transient place, or you'll find many staff are very supportive of those newbies who come along, and because we get it what it's like to be a new person, to just try and support other individuals with that process.
How do you feel within obviously the debate curriculum that you've outlined? Because there's such a range of topics that you obviously cover, and it does cover obviously a lot of well-being and social side to Dubai as well. Like within those lessons, then are you given autonomy of how you teach those lessons, or is it like a strict curriculum that you have to follow by ticking off points, or have you got the freedom essentially to teach?
Yeah, to a degree. We've still got the same flexibility that we would have in a UK school with long-term plans that then filter down into, you know, your short-term plans and how we would integrate those into lessons, starting to look at, right, well, if they've not quite fully grasped addition strategies, well, we might need to teach that in summer one, for example. So we do have that flexibility, so it's not as rigorous as you may think.
And yeah, sort of, you know, just overall, really, I mean, the online learning itself, you've said how you think it's been really beneficial over the 15 weeks that you've done. You know, it's almost 4 months. It's a long period. You've touched on you know, people at the schools in Dubai that you work for, recognizing the importance of well-being, as well as like the importance of like the technological influence going forward. So overall, I mean, would you, you know, from a personal perspective in your sort of change up, do you feel like you could recommend people, maybe if they were in the same position as you or contemplating, you know, maybe having a change, would you advise or recommend, like, you know, taking the plunge, really?
Taking the plunge to
Dubai.
learning.
Well, to Dubai and
To
online learning.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, if it's something that you are interested in, my biggest rule for coming to Dubai is just make sure that you're not running away from something, because as soon as you get here, you'll be like, you'll start to miss home very quickly. Make sure that you're moving for the right reasons. But in terms of moving over here, there are lots of similarities. There's lots of differences for well-being. Some people, you know, you won't see the color green as much, but generally it's a fantastic place, and yeah, I love it over there at the moment. So yeah, are there any other, what else would I say? I'd also try and say, you know, just do your research. If you're interested in moving over there, just do your research. There's lots of things available on the internet as well to support with that.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the online learning, you touched on some of the tools that you actually discovered and used. Are there any specifically that you'd recommend for people like myself and Sam, or listeners that are tuning in, that are just beginning their online learning journey? Like, is there any sort of tools that you would recommend for beginners, basically?
Absolutely. So I'd always say that you need to start off with a platform. Now, schools in the UK might stipulate a specific platform. I've spoken a lot about Google Classroom that I've used, just because the children have their Google Chromebooks. So I would say, if you're a student, just try and understand how they function. So things like Google Classroom. You've also got free resources. The other platform I speak quite highly of is Seesaw. There's lots of different flexibility available with Seesaw, and I suppose the CPD would be to make sure that you understand how those work. From there, one of my absolute favorites, not just as a platform, but for showcasing work, is Padlet. Padlet, there's a free element there too. It's a very straightforward one to run. There's lots of flexibility there as a resource. Then from your platforms, you've then got your, what I like to call, online tools. So that's where you start to look at different websites that can support children with learning. So you'll have your things like Times Table Rockstars for maths. You're then going to look at reading. So you'll have Epic Books or World eBooks that give children a range of different online books to read. From there, you'll then have other resources. Now, Purple Mash is great for, personally, I think, Key Stage 1 level, and you've got other resources for maths. I love a resource called Study Ladder. That was an absolute game changer for us. And then you've also got Arcademics, which is some online games there too. So there is an absolute plethora of different resources there. Those were just some of the ones that we explored. I obviously wanted to go and explore all sorts of different ones, but as I was speaking about during the podcast, I wasn't sort of permitted to explore too many because I didn't want to overwhelm the children. But I would say explore and understand how different websites work. If you want to then go and do reading on the sort of pedagogy side of things, there are more things that are started to form. At the start of online learning, there wasn't a huge amount. A lot of reading came from reflections of people who were doing sort of learning in Hong Kong and things like that. Nowadays, there's lots of reflections that you can read about pros and cons, but then you can start to research things like blended learning. So you can start to see how technology is going to integrate in the future. So there's a book called Blended Learning in Action. That's one I'm going to be trying to read over the summer to try and see how the September is going to look like, basically. So hopefully that's beneficial.
Just on that note, just for people that are listening to this episode, Tom's obviously giving out a lot of information and really, really insightful, useful information that, well, both me and Matty will be taking forward. Don't worry, we will be breaking this down into a CPD post, so you guys all get that as well. Really interesting as well that you said about pedagogy and looking behind the online learning. Some of the research that I've referenced in this podcast as well. There was a paper actually reviewing online learning and how it's impacted through COVID-19. So that the release date of that has been 2020. So it's really relevant, and it outlines the benefits of using online learning, but also outlines as well some of the drawbacks, but what you can do to overcome those drawbacks of online learning. So yeah, really, really appreciate that you highlight that. But again, those things Tom's mentioned, but also as well, the studies that have been referenced as well will be putting the CPD post going out onto our page.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, Tom, it's been absolute pleasure in terms of the interview. I think you've really outlined what we wanted to get from this, which was discussing online learning, a lot of the pros that you found in terms of dealing with the pressures and the change moving forward, how you feel that it should really be integrated into the curriculum moving forward, and how important technology is going to be for children. And I think, for my benefit, I already feel a lot more confident going forward with my own sort of CPD and teaching online. So for that, really grateful, Tom, and hopefully you've got something out of the chat as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a very reflective process, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Top man. Yeah, honestly, yeah, really, really insightful and helpful towards me as well. And I'm sure loads and loads of people will, hopefully benefit from this. I just find it like staggering and remarkable that we're still having a conversation about actually trying to integrate technology into education. Madness.
That's it. Yeah, it's fine. And if anyone does have any questions, my inbox is open, and I can try and answer those to the best of my ability.
And just on that note, like I say, Tom said his inbox is available. If you want to get in touch with him on Instagram, it is at Thomas Blakemore. Like I say, if you want to get in touch with us at the podcast, it is at the Teachers of Tomorrow. Equally, individually, myself at the Alternative Teacher _ and Sam at Mr_G_14. Like I say, we're all available for any questions and feedback going forward. But particularly on this subject, I'd definitely recommend going towards Tom. So, but yeah, absolute pleasure. Like I say, enjoyed it, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure.
Cheers.